Story 1. People always focus on the demon in their sleep paralysis experiences, which, yes, is extremely scary, but my struggle is always the less talked about paralysis part. Being able to see things unfolding without being able to physically react really upsets me and is exhausting. Story 2. I never see them. There is a strong sense that I am not alone in the room. Something is present. I cannot move and I cannot yell for help. Story 3. I used to get sleep paralysis a lot in my late teens and early 20s, but I only saw something once. I had just gone through a breakup and went to bed crying. When I woke up, unable to move, a hazy shadow cat was slinking around on the bed, purring and rubbing against me. I didn't have any cats then, but I felt comforted and drifted back to sleep. Story 4. A giant spider that forms from the walls or ceiling and simply hangs there. Story 5. It is a humanoid creature, female in appearance, very malnourished and grim. It has no eyes, only pitch black holes. Story 6. I have never actually seen anything. It is just a presence in the room. I always know it is coming when I hear what sounds like static or a waterfall, faint at first and gradually growing louder. By the time I hear it, I cannot move. It feels like someone is just outside my field of vision as the sound increases. When it reaches its loudest point, there is a sudden, sharp sound and then it is over and I can move again. It is very strange. I am older now, so when I first experienced these episodes as a child, there was no internet to look it up. It was absolutely horrifying, and when I tried to explain it to my mother, I sounded insane. Now I just accept it and I rarely experience it anymore. It used to occur about every other month. Story 7. I have sleep paralysis but no demons. It is more of an annoyance now than something frightening, and I have trained myself to break out of it very quickly. Can feel as if I will suffocate if I cannot break out. A long time ago, I had auditory hallucinations during episodes that sounded like footsteps running toward me, but thankfully that has stopped. Story 8. Back when I was a bit younger and going through a really rough period, I saw a human-like woman. Her limbs were longer than a normal person's and her fingers were long and sharp. She had no distinguishable features except black bulbous eyes, pale white skin, and a gaping black mouth. When she opened it, the sound that came out was a mixture of radio static, children screaming, and a vacuum opening like a breach in a spaceship. Nowadays, I'm so used to sleep paralysis that I recognize 3 indicators and can fight through them. These include losing my glasses in a dream, my phone breaking in a dream, or being smothered by dogs in a dream. If any of those things happen, it usually means I will experience sleep paralysis. I can usually fight my way out. Story 9. I don't have sleep paralysis, but I do have hallucinations. They typically look like dark, hunched over humanoid shapes. One time I was lying on my side and an old hag bent over and looked me in the face. That was probably the most terrifying. Sleep masks have helped quite a bit. Story 10. Once, there was a shadow in a top hat. Another time, a child made of oil crawled up from the foot of the bed. Story 11. They do not look like anything. There is a strong presence in the room that is dark, heavy, and suffocating. I have seen dark figures and shadows standing over me or across the room, but never any distinguishing features. Story 12. I have only had sleep paralysis twice before, both during very stressful times in my life. My episode involved a tall, shadowy, skinny humanoid figure with bright yellow eyes that just stood there. It freaked me out for a minute before I realized what had happened, and then I went back to sleep. Story 13. I have not had any strong sleep paralysis episodes in years. I had a small episode a couple of weeks ago, but it was just heavy breathing and an inability to move. Compared to what I am used to, it was hard to say whether it was even a sleep paralysis episode. My entities are static, shadowy figures, usually humanoid. Sometimes it is a cat that jumps on my bed. If I look at them, I experience an increasing buzzing that hurts and makes everything shake. If I try to move, the buzzing intensifies, the world slowly turns red, and I feel like I am being consumed. Usually it is a humanoid figure in the doorway. Sometimes it is a shadow on the wall. The cat has happened 3 times that I can remember. The consistent theme is the sensation that my brain is being assaulted while I lie trapped. I always wake up on my back, never in another position. Learning not to fight it helped reduce the episodes and made those that did occur milder. Resolving my unresolved stress seems to have made them go away. Story 14. I made a video to share my experience. Warning, it is terrifying. Story 15. My dad says the apparition looked like the woman from The Grudge. A woman with very long hair and a white dress would often sit beside him or caress his face when he was a small child. Story 16. I used to suffer from this as a child. It was usually a demon who looked like a woman with long black hair. It had no distinct face, just shadowy and bony features, but you could tell. I have not suffered from this in decades because the last couple times it happened I repeated "God save me" over and over in my head and I would break out of it. It has not happened again since then. Story 17. Like a handful of people here, I have never experienced demons. However, sometimes I hallucinate that someone who lives in the house, usually my mom or my boyfriend, has come into the room to get something from the wardrobe or dig in a sock drawer and then leave. I try to call out to them for help, but they do not hear me. I understand this is because I cannot actually move my mouth or use my voice. Eventually, I wake up. Time is hard to gauge in that state. I then seek them out to ask what they heard and what they saw. I am usually curious to know whether my eyes were open because otherwise I do not understand how I could see the room in such detail. Their response has always been that they have not been in my room. So I guess my demons look like my loved ones ignoring me. Story 18. Are there people who suffer from sleep paralysis regularly? I have always understood it as an occasional random event. I experienced it in high school and it was terrifying until I regained movement. I do not remember seeing a demon. I was mostly unable to move and could only look around with my eyes. It caused a slight panic before I snapped out of it after what felt like less than a minute. That was about 20 years ago, so I do not remember the details exactly. Story 19. For me, it depends on where I am. In Argentina, it is an old witch with a long nose and long hair. She sits crouched on my chest and screams in my ear. It happened so often I got bored and thought, oh good, this again. In Hawaii, it is a Doberman with no skin, just muscle and sinew, that runs into the bed and tries to maul my neck. This is the scariest because it rushes at me. In New Zealand, it is a tall, lanky shadow figure that just watches me from the door. Not in a scary or threatening way, but as if it had a bad dream and wants to sleep in my mom and dad's bed. Story 20. I looked over toward my bedroom door and saw something standing up, probably 7 feet tall. It was pitch black with the scariest look on its face and bright yellow eyes staring back. It stood on 2 hoof-like feet but otherwise had no discernible shape. I was so terrified I quickly looked away. The second I did, it felt like an elephant began sitting on me and pressing me through the bed. I couldn't breathe or move. I had a panic attack once it was over. Story 21. I do not see them. I hear and feel them, murmurs, growling, or shouting. At times it feels like an intense pressure is on top of me and my head is going to explode. I am completely paralyzed. I have learned to lean into it and not panic. I focus on moving my little finger and then I snap out of it. Eventually I go back to sleep. I do not open my eyes because I do not want to see anything I would regret. Story 22. I asked a friend. He said he did not see one. My uncle and aunt said they saw a monkey. I have heard of it in the Mexican community as a sleep paralysis demon called El Chango. Even my American coworker said he had a monkey, so I do not know what that is about. I had one episode and did not see a demon. It felt like a mouse was gnawing my fingers, and for some reason my view would switch to Frieza from Dragon Ball Z slowly walking up the stairs to get me. Story 23. I saw a post on Tumblr that said that after someone confronted their sleep paralysis demon, it stopped appearing. I tried it and mine also disappeared. Story 24. I once managed to transform a sleep paralysis demon into an alluring lover. It was essentially lucid dreaming during sleep paralysis. I knew it was not real, but the experience was amazing. Story 25. I have experienced sleep paralysis for over 30 years and have seen the demon or entity only once or twice. One time it was a Joker-like face without makeup slowly emerging from behind an end table. The other time it was the more common witch-like figure in a corner. Story 26. Can someone please explain to me what this is about? I have woken up with this twice in my life, demon-free. Story 27. I have never seen him. I have only heard him laughing as he pours shadows down on me like congealed liquid. Story 28. It happened to me twice, both times as audio. With my eyes open, I heard wet feet slapping rapidly against the tile floor as something rushed toward my bed. It murmured the same phrase in my ear 3 times in a demonic voice. I couldn't understand the words. It sounded like Latin played in reverse. The second time, I heard running and a deep voice roar, "I'll fucking kill you." And I jumped out of bed. Story 29. I have both sleep paralysis and hallucinations, and my paralysis demon has always been something I am afraid of. That fear has changed as I have aged. When I was young, it was more of a monster with no concrete form. A large shadowy mass that lurked in the corner of my room, like a dark spot you just knew contained something watching you. It also appeared as massive spiders and snakes that lunged at me or crawled toward me. As I got older, it became more humanoid, usually a hooded figure standing in my doorway staring at me. I also had a very strange hallucination where a giant chunk of flesh hit the standing fan in my room and splattered pieces everywhere. Hallucinations are much worse because with sleep paralysis I know what is happening as soon as I cannot move, and that awareness snaps me out of it quickly. Hallucinations do not tend to go away once I start to move. Most of my hallucinations have been people sneaking into my room. A man in a hooded sweatshirt standing in my doorway who, as soon as we made eye contact, would startle and run away. An old, dirty hag bending over my face whose crusty hair I felt on my cheek and whose face was so close. Someone in dark clothes tiptoeing toward my bathroom holding a bat. When I begin to get out of bed to move toward them, they remain until my brain realizes they are not real. Sleeping is weird. Story 30. One day, a dark shadow hovered over me while I was sleeping and kept pressing on my shoulder, so I could not move. Another day, I saw a beautiful little dog near my bed, but could not move to pet him. Story 31. A child has stood by my side, shaking me and yelling for help. A tarantula crawled toward me across my bed covers and slipped through a slit directly above my chest. A girl crawled quickly on all fours past my bedroom door, then slowly into my room. Tetris blocks fell down my wall, but their edges were rounded and soft, so they bounced instead of fitting into the slots. A man yelled in my face while I was chained to a chair. His face distorted, his mouth enlarged, and his head shook violently. The paralysis occurs at least once or twice a week. Often it is caused by whatever I am dreaming, producing a night terror. I wake up, but remain asleep with my eyes open, so the dream overlays what I am seeing. Nothing sits on my chest like in pictures. Instead, there is an utter inability to move. If I try to speak, it is often nonsense, but in my mind I know what I am trying to say. I usually make wailing noises of terror. Coming out of it, whether a partner wakes me or I wake naturally, it often feels like the movies when someone is shell-shocked and the world suddenly regains sound. Story 32. No demons, not even the fear of one. Just the absolute terror of that paralysis while being able to hear, trying to scream and nothing coming out. Story 33. I barely see them, but it feels like a regular person broke into my apartment. Funnily enough, most of the time when this happens I go to check the door and discover I forgot to lock it. I guess my subconscious remembers. Story 34. I do not have any. Why are people downvoting me for not having demons during sleep paralysis? Laughing out loud. Story 35. My first experience involved a tall man with long arms and legs, all black. He entered my room, walked to the end of the bed, and slowly climbed on top of me. He was either pushing me into the bed or sitting on my chest. I was facing right and could not turn my head to get a good look. I was terrified. I tried to scream for help. My mouth opened and nothing came out. I panicked more. Then my body came back online and I could turn my head. I looked to the left and saw that the door was closed. Somehow the logical part of my brain kicked in and the fear subsided. I woke my parents and told them I had just been attacked by a motherfucking demon. Then I learned about sleep paralysis, laughing out loud. One attack was enough. I can feel the onset now and I just snap out of it. Story 36. My worst encounter resembled the woman in Evil Dead Rise. Years before the movie came out, she was contorted in my basement window well, put her fingers to her lips and made the shush gesture, laughed, and then stood in front of me. She held me down and spoke strange words in a voice that sounded like 1,000 overlapping whispers. She also vomited in my mouth. 0 out of 10. Definitely would not recommend. Story 37. My paralysis is infrequent, but the demon is always me. As a person who is fairly benign in real life, it fucks me up, man. Story 38. I don't get a sensation of any type of presence. I just become aware that I'm sleeping and can't move. Still very unsettling. Story 39. Small, gargoyle-like creatures sit on my bed and scream in my ear. Story 40. Mine are unfortunately very realistic. The last time I had sleep paralysis, the demon I saw was a very normal-looking man climbing on top of me. Story 41. They feed on my negative emotions and appear partly transparent, with a brown substance filling their bodies. I believe that brown substance is my negativity. We are a food source for them. Story 42. I have total aphantasia. I just feel the presence, typically a Baba Yaga. Story 43. I never actually saw any monsters. The creepiest thing was a small television in the room. I opened my eyes and saw words on the screen that said, "He's awake now. Get him." I couldn't move and panicked for a few seconds before I fully woke up. Story 44. A very tall, black shadow hunched over, its long arms almost touching the ground, swaying back and forth and growling. Story 45. It is a woman with long hair that covers her face. She walks like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. I always see her long fingers and nails at the side of my bedroom door before she peeks out. She then jumps on my bed and her hands wrap around my throat as she laughs. Story 46. Not necessarily sleep paralysis, but I've had severe night terrors since I was a child. They sometimes bled into waking nightmares. I would wake up seeing something horrible that did something creepy or horrifying, then I'd close my eyes and wake up again. That usually tricked my brain into dropping the nightmare and working properly. One that still sticks with me is a burned child in a dirty white shirt crawling on the ceiling with her head turned all the way toward me. I closed my eyes and opened them again, and she was at the foot of the bed. I screamed at my former wife to turn on the lights. She held me while I sobbed into her arms. Story 47. I never saw them, but I always heard them. I knew something was there. I heard loud static and someone counting backward. The best way I can describe it is as static electricity. I know it sounds strange. Story 48. I do not have demons. I panic for a few seconds when I cannot move until I can move again. Story 49. Mine wears a ragged cloak. I can't see his face. He slithers along the floor like a snake, climbs onto my bed, lies across my back while I sleep on my belly, and breathes in my face. I always close my eyes when he is on my bed, so I haven't seen his face yet. Luckily, I haven't had sleep paralysis in a while. Whenever I feel it starting to happen, I jump out of bed before I become completely unable to move. The sensation of a sleep paralysis episode starts at my feet like static and travels up my body until I cannot move. Story 50. It is always in the corner of the room. It is a tall figure of a Victorian man. Story 51. Thanks a lot, guys. Now I cannot fall back asleep. I have never heard of this before. Story 52. Tall shadow humanoid figure. His upper body is broader than his tall legs. When I look at him, he moves slowly, but the distance remains, like a camera panning. His hands cannot be seen. They are not invisible. They simply cannot be observed when I try. Still, when I stop looking at him, I can feel his hands reaching out and pulling. Usually I am calm, recognize the situation, and focus on breathing and moving my toes first. Once I woke and screamed my partner's name, only to realize she did not hear me because I had not really woken. I was activating the nerves to scream. I had left the dream environment but remained in the room, still dreaming. This time the walls opened into a rose-shaped void of shadow that became a tunnel. The tunnel enveloped me. Arms made of shadow kept breaking through its walls and touching me as I felt myself falling. After that, I truly woke, actually screaming, but the second paralysis felt real and waking reality felt fake. Reality felt like a veil meant to comfort me from a place that seemed more real. It messed me up for a couple of hours, then I moved on. Double paralysis is no joke. Story 53. A dead, zombie, or demon-like old woman with messy long hair. Once her head hung from a wall hook. Another time she crawled like a spider, her chest facing upward and her limbs bent unnaturally. Whenever she appeared, those were the most realistic dreams I have ever had. Even after I woke, I still saw her for over 30 seconds. She was exactly where she had been in the dream relative to me, except the location was now in real life. I froze and stared as she began to fade. Even then she seemed so real, as if she existed in the three-dimensional space in front of me rather than as an afterimage. I stared without flinching because I told myself it was not real and that it would pass. My heart would race, but I felt confident knowing it was not real. When I was a teenager, however, the figure was an ambiguous shadowy form. I do not know why it now haunts me as a dead woman. Story 54. They appear either as large, looming shadows standing right over my bed or as a giant floating head looking down at me from the ceiling. Story 55. Growing up, my siblings and I had the same one. It stood in the corner of my room, and I could not make out much other than a big grin on its face. It was strange that several of us had the same one, and we all stopped having it after we moved out of that house. Story 56. I used to see a dark figure of a withered-looking woman. She wore a tattered black dress that looked like something from the Victorian era. She had long, messy black hair and a black-gray veil that covered her face. Depending on the lighting, I could see two large dark circles through the veil that resembled empty eye sockets. Her skin was gray and lifeless. She had bony arms and long, thin fingers with dirty nails. She usually appeared at the end of my bed. Sometimes she emerged from behind me, just out of my eyesight, as though she had come through the wall. She never spoke. She would slowly inch closer, make her way onto the bed, and sit on my chest or legs. I could feel her weight as if she were actually there. Then she would stab me in the chest or neck, or sometimes strangle me. That went on every night for 2 weeks, and then it stopped. I haven't had any sleep paralysis in years. Story 57. I've only had it once. It was a black and white Victorian chimney sweep boy who hung himself at the end of my bed. The whole thing was terrifying. I couldn't move or do anything. It was absolutely creepy. Story 58. The clearest one I remember. I was falling asleep on a folded futon when I suddenly realized I could only move my eyes. On my right, rising from below the futon, which was only 1.5 feet off the ground, a gray, horrific hag with long black hair and empty eyes slowly rose and stared down at me with a strange, silent laugh, the kind so quiet your ears start to ring. After a while, I threw my arm against the wall. Once I could move, I sat up in a cold sweat, drank some water, and went back to bed an hour or so later. Story 59. I have only had one dream like that. It was a giant doll with hollow eyes, a stitched mouth, and scraggly black hair. The skin looked like human leather because you could see bruises all over, and there were stitch seams everywhere. I woke up with it sewing my mouth closed, pulling the last thread. I tried to scream, but it was completely muffled. It shifted out of view and was gone. I ran to the bedroom door to get out, but when I tried the door I realized everything was fine. I have not had another dream like that since, but it was earlier this year. Story 60. I rarely see them, but when I do, they are 1. A dark silhouette consisting only of a head, close to my face about 10 centimeters away. I could feel cold breath and a sense of evil. 2. 3 dark or brown silhouettes standing in a circle at the foot of my bed, chanting what sounded like Old Latin. They did not seem to care about me and simply stood there doing their thing. 3. A dark silhouette with long arms and legs crawling around the furniture or along the ceiling. Once it jumped at my bed but missed. I slapped it and laughed out loud. Since then, it only moves around the furniture and hides in the darkest corners. I encounter this one most often, and I think it is the same as the dark silhouette described first. Most of the time I am positioned so that I cannot see the room. I can only hear chanting, bells, foreign languages, or many simultaneous whispers. None of the entities in my room have visible faces. They sometimes have faint whitish eyes or no visible eyes at all and appear as dark shapes, which might be due to the overall darkness in the room. After more than 10 years, I have become used to them, so they do not bother me anymore. Story 61. I am regularly visited by 3 entities. 2 appeared mostly during my teen years, and the third appears now as an adult. One was a malnourished woman in a black dress with messy black and white hair. She would usually stand by my closet, looking down but with her eyes turned upward, watching me. Another was a large man in a black trench coat. I never saw his face. I mostly saw him when I lay on my side. I would feel his presence and see his cloak and sometimes his hands, nearly decayed with long white claws. The last one has tended to follow me since I moved. He is basically a small person version of Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. He looks very similar. He walks across my chest, sits on my legs, whispers in my ear, and talks to me. He whispered his name, Ricky. I do not know if anyone else has had similar interactions, but mine used to be quite intense. As I have gotten older and can get myself out of it more quickly, it is not too bad. Story 62. Mine is an evil-looking old man with white fabric flowing around him. God, I hope never to see him again. Story 63. I wake up trying to scream. I can only move my eyes. My mouth opens and closes, and I am breathing, cannot engage my vocal cords, cannot move. All I can do is hyperventilate in very weak breaths. I am very fit, so a weak breath is strange to me. It is not enough air for anything, but somehow I do not have frequent asthma attacks during episodes. I feel my heart racing much faster and harder than during any race. I think of the trouble I could be in if I break out of this state. Then something comes, usually a dark humanoid figure who walks just like my father. Sometimes he speaks, sometimes he does not. It is never recognizable. Maybe I am too stressed to hear actual words. Once it was a raccoon in my bed hissing at me. Once a young mangled man crawled up the foot of my loft bed and all the way to my face with a knife in hand. Passed out before the cold steel started cutting my neck. Sometimes it is a young girl I knew in elementary school. She comforts me, whispers that it is not my fault, that I am safe and that I will be okay, and then proceeds to torture me after calming me down. Does that answer your question? Story 64. I have experienced sleep paralysis many times, but only once did I actually see something. My head was facing a poster on my wall. A figure was trying to come out of the poster, and it looked like it was behind a stretchy, rubbery material. It was absolutely terrifying. Story 65. A green monkey has feathers instead of fur. He has sharp teeth, angry eyes, and a neck like a giraffe. He sits on my chest and holds me down while grinning at me. Sometimes the room fills with blinking, colorful lights like a Christmas tree. Story 66. Not a demon, but when I get sleep paralysis episodes, I usually see a very large man-shaped figure cloaked in black looming in the doorway. He gets closer and closer to the side of the bed. I usually cannot make out a face. From my bed, I look out and see him vaguely in the doorway and think, oh my God, is someone standing there? It is hard to tell in the dark. There is definitely someone there. That person-shaped shadow does not make sense. He gets closer, and I cannot scream or move as he leans over me. One time my toddler was sleeping in my bed with me during an episode. My hand must have touched his soft leg and my brain turned it into the idea that this giant man had soft baby skin. That made it worse somehow, like a 6.5-foot tall baby man with arms like chubby baby legs. I do not know, it was the worst. I also get hypnagogic hallucinations of bugs, like cockroaches on my pillow or hordes of giant spiders descending from the ceiling. Those are almost always bugs. I can move around when it is happening, which makes it slightly less bad because I can turn on a light. Even though the hallucinations persist, They stop making sense in the light and I can think it through a little. A real cockroach would not be moving so slowly after I have rolled over and turned the light on. I can pat the pillow and feel that it is not there. My youngest child also gets these and it is hard to see him struggle. My oldest had night terrors and used to sleepwalk. Basically, our whole family is part of the freaky sleep stuff crew. Story 67. My dead grandmother's gaunt face on the night she passed away, with spiders crawling out of it. Story 68. They were like shadows. Once I felt a presence and saw a black mass lying beside me. On another occasion, I saw a shadowy little girl in a baseball cap looking at me from the foot of my bed. Story 69. An old woman in a cloak or shroud stands over me, covering my face. Story 70. I mostly see the girl from the ring crawling through my room. Story 71. I have not had them in a long time, but when I did, they were usually black shadow creatures with no distinct features, possibly demons or just shadows or blackness. They prevented me from waking up and were very painful. I experienced physical pain inside my head. Story 72. I don't experience them often now because I've learned to force myself awake as soon as they start. But when they began, I was quite young and didn't know what was happening, and it was very scary. I never actually saw it. It was shrouded, like in a dream when people have no visible faces. The scary part was simply knowing it was there or that it was coming. Story 73. A large humanoid, completely black, crawled on the ceiling. He used to affect my sleep a lot. When I worked nights, I experienced sleep paralysis several times a week. One day during an episode, one saw him on the ceiling. I told him I was too tired for his nonsense, that I did not want to be tired for my shift, and I closed my eyes to go back to sleep. That was years ago. Now I may have an episode only once or twice a year. Story 74. I wonder if I have sleep paralysis because I have never had a demon or figure in the room with me. When I experience it, it is more of a dream. I dream of trying to get up and slowly, agonizingly start to move. This usually takes the form of slipping or falling out of bed before I am inevitably reset back to where I was, which lets me know that I am dreaming. This feeling is usually accompanied by difficulty breathing. I usually break out of it by holding my breath and forcing my head up, which wakes me up. I have noticed this happens when I sleep on my back, so I now sleep on my side out of necessity. Story 75. I've only had it once, and I was in the North Country. I woke up and saw the ghosts of two Native American children messing with the window blinds. We had been talking about ghosts before going to sleep, and an air vent was moving the blinds, so my brain connected the two. Story 76. I used to experience it all the time, and I never saw any kind of figure. I would mainly see very distorted versions of the rooms I was in and be unable to move. Story 77. My demon is a combination of Bart Simpson and Bob the Builder. It is a strange figure with 14 legs and something else that watches me all the time. It looks like an old man, and its name is Rick Roller. Story 78. The hag is old beyond time. Her skin is leathery and blackened, stretched across old bones. She wears rough black woven cloth. Her nails are long daggers. Her hair is long, stringy, and black. Her eyes are young, bright blue, and full of hate. She grabs you and crushes you with enormous strength. You gasp for air. You can feel her breath hot against your neck. You cannot move. You want to scream and get away. Then she slowly disappears from your vision. But you can still feel her grip, her claws digging in deep. Story 79. Fun story. I'll try to keep it short. My buddy and I used to ghost hunt. It was basically going to spooky places with a few voice recorders, walking around and asking questions. One night we left a voice recorder in a cemetery near where we were camping and planned to pick it up in the morning before we left. That night I had sleep paralysis. Normally it's just a silhouette of a person or demon that starts by watching me in the corner, then approaches, holds me down, and snarls. In the morning we went to get the recorder, but it was not where we had left it. It was about 10 feet away, which was strange, but we grabbed it and left. Later, when we listened to the recording, a few hours in, we heard movement. Something started scratching the recorder, and the snarl on the tape was so similar to my sleep paralysis demon that I got chills and started freaking out. Logically, there had to be an explanation, so I searched online. It turned out my paralysis demon was a raccoon that tried to steal the voice recorder. It was a coincidence that both things happened the same night. Story 80. Sorry to be a wet blanket, but I have never experienced sleep paralysis demons. I can only speculate it is because I never had the, "oh shit, what's happening to me?" moment most people report. I knew about sleep paralysis long before it happened to me, so when it did I thought, oh, this is sleep paralysis. Being at ease with it kept me in a good frame of mind, so my brain, still flooded with sleep-related chemistry, never conjured the sinister presences and feelings some people experience as their minds try to make sense of a strange situation. That is my theory. I have no idea how accurate it is. The weirdest thing I experienced was one time when I was paralyzed but my left arm was free. I spent the time waving it back and forth above me and rocking my body in time like a pendulum. Story 81. There is always a shadow. Sometimes you cannot see it. You can only hear it. Story 82. I have experienced this a couple of times. The first time was the worst. It felt like my bed was swallowing me. Fortunately, I did not see any figures. Now, though, I am more used to the feeling, so my mind recognizes it right away and I can relax. It gets worse and tighter when you panic. Story 83. The first time it happened, I woke up but could not move. Something heavy pressed on my chest. In the corner of my room, I saw a dark, shadowy figure with no face, staring at me. My heart raced and I could not scream. It seemed completely real, as if it were right there watching me. It did not move, but its presence was terrifying, as if it were feeding on my fear. Story 84. The last time I had sleep paralysis, around a decade ago, there wasn't any visual component, but I felt long bony fingers emerge from the bed and try to pull me under by the throat. I have only had sleep paralysis a handful of times. Story 85. I assume it's like a dog thing. When I have it, I sleep on my back, but I feel it crawling on me. Story 86. I cannot usually see them, but I feel their eyes watching me. I hear footsteps coming closer. Occasionally I see one. It appears human, like a home invader. I think my apartment has been broken into, but then I wake up and everything is normal. Story 87. I can induce a sleep paralysis episode by sleeping on my stomach. That said, I have never seen my demon. It is a terrifying presence. A feeling of intense pressure crushing me in addition to the paralysis. Even worse, sometimes I know I am asleep and fully aware of what is occurring, but that offers no relief from the hopelessness and dread. Story 88. It's never consistent. It can take the form of any object, a friend, or a creature I've never seen before, yet it always brings the same sense of absolute dread. Story 89. No demons. I just can't get up. Freaks me out more than a demon, though. Story 90. I don't see any demon. I just can't move. Then I start to panic and can't breathe. Story 91. I only experienced it once. It was a massive scorpion, a little bigger than a personal watermelon. Story 92. I cannot see it because it is on my back and is breathing down my neck. Story 93. No demons. Only the sense that if I do not roll onto my side or completely off the bed or couch, I will not be okay. Story 94. I have had sleep paralysis twice. Both occurred while I was on my stomach with a blanket over my head, and something seemed to sit on me. It made breathing very difficult, but I remembered the trick of squeezing my hands and toes until feeling returned. The two episodes happened within a month of watching The Haunting of Hill House, which makes me think they are correlated. Story 95. I do not see a demon. I did at the beginning, but now I often create a friend just out of sight whom I call for help. Story 96. I get them, although I used to have them more often. I never remember what they look like, only a feeling of something in the room and on me. Once I realized it is a common experience and read about others having it, the episodes subsided a lot. I still get them every now and then, but I am aware it is probably because I am sleeping on my back or at a strange angle. I tell myself this is just sleep paralysis caused by my body position, and then I wake up and it is gone. Story 97. It is the shadow figure of a little boy or a full-blown eyeless woman. It varies, but the woman is far more frightening. The boy is just a silhouette, and I have not had a sleep paralysis dream in quite some time. My first experience was the woman. I was maybe 13, staying at my grandparents' on a really hot summer day in our quiet middle-of-nowhere town. They had an old TV, and I used to love sleeping in their bed watching old cartoons on days like that. The attic door was right above their bedroom. My grandpa removed the doorknob when we were little to keep us out and slid a butter knife over the door frame, between the custom-cut trim, to block it. Many of the house's doorways were like that. The knife was high so we could not reach it as kids. That day I dozed into a deep sleep. I woke up but could not move and was staring directly at the closet to the attic. I felt heavy and could only breathe, and I started to panic. Then the woman slid through the door as if she were made of air. She seeped through it. She wore an old yellow dress with tiny blue flowers all over it. She had no eyes, just black holes, and her skin was wrinkled. She did not have a perm. Her hair was short and curly, like she had put curlers in it the night before. She floated to the side of the bed. I was crying but could not move or make a sound. She leaned down in a sort of bowing stance just above my face. I blinked, yelled, and could suddenly move. I cried and went outside. The whole experience terrified me as a child. I never told my family because I was worried they would think I was making it up. I am 29 now and have had my fair share of sleep paralysis dreams, but that one has stuck with me my entire life. Story 98. I dreamed of a demon that began choking me. I woke in sleep paralysis and could still feel its hand around my throat. It appeared as a little girl with a huge mouth full of sharp teeth, though usually such entities look human-like, dressed in black with holes where their eyes and mouths should be. Story 99. I do not see her, but I imagine her as a seductive temptress. Mostly I just hear her in my head. Story 100. I only had one classic episode. Its face was waxy, gray, and featureless. So close to mine I could not focus. There were no openings for eyes, nose, or mouth, just poorly formed clay. I used to have recurring dreams of humans with giant black almond-shaped eyes that buzzed with electricity. Story 101. Mine was a humanoid woman with a burnt face floating above me. Once I stopped believing in ghosts and embraced science, it stopped happening. Story 102. There is a cloaked figure with an oversized hood. I cannot see the figure's face or features. Sometimes they stand directly over me. Feels like the air is being sucked out of my lungs and chest. Story 103. There are many. One is a disfigured child. Another is an old woman in a black dress. The last one I can remember is a gnome-like creature that looks demonic. Story 104. They squealed like distressed pigs and scraped the floor with their nails. Story 105. Mine is usually a shadow that starts to morph into a dragon or serpent-type creature with huge teeth, or sometimes ghostly figures. It watches me for a while as I try to move, and it feels like I am using all my strength to move my arm an inch. I can feel my breathing getting slower and slower until I struggle to breathe. The only times I have been able to snap myself out of it are when I force myself to stop breathing. I wake up gasping for air, so I might actually stop breathing in reality, but I am not sure. I know it only happens if I fall asleep on my back, so I sleep on my side. Story 106. Luckily, I no longer experience sleep paralysis, but the figures were always dark, indistinct human silhouettes, usually standing in the doorway or hunched over me. I cannot tell you how many times I have snapped myself out of it by punching the air. Story 107. A minotaur was breathing right above me. Took about 10 seconds before I could move, and then he faded away. Story 108. Hat Man. A man with a pale face and a broad-brimmed black hat. Shadow Boy. A boy made of shadows with gold eyes. Mr. Face. A face appearing as if in a cloud or a bush, materializing out of nowhere. Lady Screams. Never seen her, but her screams are extremely loud in my ear until I can wiggle my toes enough to wake up. Then they stop. Story 109. It has only happened to me twice, but both times I was certainly not alone. I could not see anyone. If anyone was present, they were behind me. Story 110. I had sleep paralysis once. My entire room was television static except for a masculine-looking humanoid silhouette. I named him the Static Man, and I have not seen him since. Story 111. I've never actually had a demon before. I consider myself lucky in the sense that I had many psychedelic experiences and had read the Wikipedia page at least twice out of curiosity and fascination before my first experience. The first time I got it, there was initial panic, extremely intense. I am terribly claustrophobic, and my mind immediately thought, "Sweet, we are buried alive, time to rage." After the initial panic, it was like someone turned a light on, literally and figuratively, and I thought, "Oh, sleep paralysis, it will go away." And it did. The worst or scariest episode started when I fell asleep on my couch. At that point, my strategy when I realized I was temporarily paralyzed was to just go back to sleep, which usually worked. This time I had a vivid waking dream that I had fallen off the couch and wrapped my blanket around my neck. To add to the terror I was already feeling, I was still somewhat aware that I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but it would not stop, and every time I managed to move even an inch, the blanket seemed to get tighter around my neck. When I actually woke up, I sprang forward, inhaling one of the deepest, most desperate breaths I had ever taken. The movie trope of someone waking violently from a nightmare and instinctively patting themselves down is true, at least in that case. Story 112. It is a shadow woman. She is tall, leans over me, and presses on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Her blank face appears inches from mine. I always try to yell and move but cannot, and sometimes I do not remember the incident. I have woken my wife by yelling when I regain consciousness, only to fall almost immediately back asleep, leaving her frightened and wondering what happened. Story 113. I just had it 2 minutes ago. A large hooded figure was standing beside the bed. Story 114. I rarely see much, but I started sleeping with an eye mask, and it helped a bit with the expectation and confusion of my surroundings. The worst is that I feel things like someone running over me, someone sitting down next to me on my bed, or someone trying to get into my apartment. I feel like I am passing in and out of consciousness, gasping for help when I can, and telling myself to sit up and check the door or make sure nothing is around, but I cannot. Story 115. An ice-kong zombie from Game of Thrones with no face. Super tall and slender, it does not look like anything. It only feels like one. Story 116. I've had sleep paralysis before, but I don't have a demon or anything. It is just my body being paralyzed while I am aware of it and waiting for it to stop. When I hallucinate, it is usually auditory, and it is usually my own voice or the other voices I used to talk to myself in my head, but they sound like they are out loud. Story 117. A bear was invading my camp. I tried to wake everyone and get them into the truck, but I could not speak, yell, or nudge them. Story 118. I had one episode when I was fully conscious. Every time I woke and tried to leave my bed, I was pulled back in as if I were dreaming, but my brain was functioning as if I were awake. That was the most terrifying experience I have ever had. After that, I was stuck, unable to move or speak until I finally woke up for real, terrified. Story 119. I do not open my eyes. I sleep facing down. Feels like something is on top of me. It also growls and roars. Story 120. Echoing what others said about a presence. I once saw a folded man. I do not know how to describe it. It looked like a man whose skin was folded inward and over itself, covering him, and he was hunched because the skin was pulling so tightly, he could not stand up straight. Story 121. I don't have demons most of the time. Usually I just cannot move. I experience sleep paralysis 2 to 3 times a week. Sometimes it is accompanied by nightmares, but not always. People tend to dramatize sleep paralysis. It is an uncomfortable sleep condition with negative health effects. Story 122. I experienced this for the first time recently. It lasted about 45 seconds. I did not feel a presence in the room. I only felt locked in place. I had to speak aloud to break free. Story 123. There is no physical demon per se, just an overwhelming sense of impending harm. I am aware of someone or something trying to harm me and cannot move. Often one aspect of these episodes is that I cannot open my eyes. If my eyes are open, my vision is distorted. 0 stars. Do not recommend. Story 124. I do not have sleep paralysis often anymore. When I was a child, it was a tall man in a brown suit with an owl on his shoulder. Story 125. I do not see demons, but I have an overwhelming sense of dread, and being unable to move is horrible. I can usually feel it coming on and stop it before it sets in. I begin to feel very heavy and have only a few seconds to fight it off. Story 126. No demon, no specter, no feeling of being watched. I am frozen for what feels like hours, unable to move or breathe, suffocating and trying to scream or move enough to get someone's attention. Story 127. I have never seen them but have felt a strong presence, as if something were pinning me down. It does not take me long to realize it is just sleep paralysis, so I try to say a prayer or sing a song. The best way to snap out of sleep paralysis faster is to do something that requires focus or small body movements. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.